Hey there. Ever feel like you're trying to catch a ride on a rocket ship that's already taken off? That's kind of what it feels like to live in Austin these days, right? But what if we could peek behind the curtain? See the control panel where those big decisions about growth and change are being made? Well, buckle up, because today's deep dive takes us straight to the heart of it all. Austin City Council meetings. We're dissecting two meetings worth of minutes, April 4th and April 18th to be exact, to uncover how this city is being shaped for the future. Your future. And let me tell you, as someone who actually enjoys reading these things, there's some fascinating stuff buried in there. Luckily, I've got our expert here to help us separate the signal from the noise. What are we seeing in terms of big picture themes?
What's fascinating is how these meetings are like a microcosm of the forces shaping Austin. We see the tension between managing rapid growth and preserving what makes the city unique. For example, there's a huge emphasis on infrastructure, expanding the airport, negotiating with developers on new projects. It's clear the city is gearing up for even more people.
Yeah, the Arrivals and Departures Hall project at the airport definitely caught my eye. It sounds massive. What's the story there?
This isn't just about adding a few gates, it's a major expansion, and they're using something called the Construction Manager at Risk method, which basically means they're bringing in a dedicated pro to oversee the whole shebang. This signals they're prioritizing efficiency and probably trying to avoid delays or cost overruns. After all, a bigger airport means more business, more tourism, and potentially shorter lines for us, eventually.
Okay, so smoother travel, hopefully. But all this growth isn't cheap, right? I noticed a lot of cost participation agreements sprinkled throughout these minutes. Sounds like developers are chipping in, though.
Absolutely. The city is making sure that growth helps pay for itself. These agreements mean developers contribute to upgrading roads, utilities, all that essential infrastructure, so it's not all on the taxpayers' shoulders. This could mean a more fiscally responsible approach to growth, but it also highlights how dramatically the cityscape is changing, with developers footing some of the bill for that transformation.
A changing skyline, and speaking of change,
Right.
there's no escaping the housing situation in these meetings.
It's front and center, and not just in general terms. They're taking concrete steps, authorizing funds for a family stabilization grant program to help folks stay in their homes, for example. This isn't just talk, it's direct action to address the housing crisis.
Right, and it's interesting, they're not just throwing money at the problem either. There's a lot of talk about long-term solutions, like community land trusts. Those seem to be gaining traction as a way to create truly affordable housing.
Exactly. A community land trust basically ensures that housing stays affordable because the land itself is owned by the trust, not individual homeowners. So even as property values around them skyrocket, those homes remain within reach. It's a way to create permanently affordable housing, which is a game changer in a city like Austin where prices are, well.
For sure. And speaking of targeted approaches, what's the deal with this resolution about the 78782 zip code? That seems very specific.
That's a great example of the council zooming in on a neighborhood level. 78702 has become a prime spot for development, so this resolution directing the city manager to create a more holistic plan for that area tells us they're trying to get ahead of the curve. They want to avoid the pitfalls of rapid gentrification, ensuring that longtime residents aren't pushed out as the area booms. It's an attempt to manage change in a way that benefits everyone, not just newcomers or developers.
It's like you're trying to find that sweet spot progress without displacement. But managing that kind of tightrope walk has to be a challenge, right?
Absolutely. And these meetings show us just how complex that balancing act can be. There's a lot at stake and a lot of voices vying to be heard.
And that's where things get really interesting, wouldn't you say? Because it's not just about the big picture stuff.
Exactly. These meetings are also full of those smaller details, the local stories that really bring the city to life.
Like renaming a historic bathhouse.
Precisely. They voted to rename the Barton Springs Pool Bathhouse after Joan Means Cabell, a prominent figure in Austin's history. These are the kinds of decisions that shape our collective memory, honoring the people who made Austin what it is today.
And it's not just about the past. These meetings also give us a glimpse into the city's more playful side, right?
Absolutely. Remember that Wild West Purim celebration you mentioned? The council waived fees for this event, which tells us they're supporting those quirky, uniquely Austin events that make this city so vibrant.
It's those little details that remind you that behind all the official documents and big decisions, there's a city full of life, laughter, and, well, a little bit of Wild West spirit. Okay, so we've got infrastructure, housing, history, and even a touch of cowboy fun, and we're just getting started. What else is on the agenda for today's deep dive?
Well, remember how we were talking about the council's efforts to make housing more affordable? They're tackling that challenge from multiple angles, exploring both immediate solutions and long-term strategies.
Yeah, the Family Stabilization Grant Program definitely seems like a lifeline for folks struggling right now. But what I find really interesting is their exploration of community land trusts. It feels like a more sustainable way to create affordable housing for the long haul.
It is. And for those who aren't familiar with community land trusts, imagine this. A nonprofit organization owns the land, removing that cost from the equation. Residents then lease the land for a very long time, making homeownership much more attainable.
So it's like taking the land itself off the speculative market, right?
Yeah.
Which, in a city like Austin, where land is practically gold dust, is huge. It ensures those homes stay affordable even as the neighborhood around them changes.
Exactly. It's a way to create lasting affordability, preventing displacement, and fostering more diverse, inclusive communities.
It's like they're playing the long game, thinking generations ahead, which is something I think we need more of in these fast-paced times. But let's be honest, not every city council meeting is about grand visions of the future. Sometimes it's about the nitty-gritty details, the stuff that directly impacts our daily lives.
And that's where those often overlooked items on the consent agenda come into play. The ones that are bundled together and voted on all at once.
Yeah, because they're usually non-controversial, right?
Right.
Like approving permits or something. Although I have a feeling those can get spicy sometimes too.
Oh, absolutely. But what's important is that these consent agenda items often reveal the behind-the-scenes workings of the city. For example, buried in the April 18th meeting minutes, there's an item about a cost participation agreement for a new development on East Riverside Drive.
Okay, so back to those agreements where developers help fund infrastructure upgrades. What's the significance of this one?
This specific agreement highlights how the city is trying to manage growth in a way that benefits everyone. The developer is contributing funds to improve pedestrian walkways and bike lanes along East Riverside Drive.
So it's not just about adding more cars to the road, they're thinking about alternative modes of transportation too.
Precisely. And that's crucial in a city like Austin, where traffic is, shall we say, a perennial topic of conversation. These smaller details might not make headlines, but they have a direct impact on our quality of life, making our neighborhoods more livable and sustainable.
It's like those cost participation agreements are a microcosm of the bigger picture. Managing growth, ensuring affordability, and creating a city that works for everyone. But let's face it, sometimes those big visions clash with the realities on the ground, which is where public hearings come in, right?
Absolutely. Public hearings are where the rubber meets the road. It's where residents, developers, and council members come face to face. And let's just say things can get interesting.
Oh yeah, I bet. It's like a town hall meeting scene in every movie ever where passions run high and the stakes are personal.
Precisely. And one of the most contentious issues we see playing out in these public hearings is the battle between preserving the character of existing neighborhoods and making room for new development. It's a classic dilemma, and Austin is definitely no stranger to it.
For sure. So walk us through a specific example. What's a public hearing that caught your attention? What were the key arguments being made?
We'll take the public hearing on April 4th regarding the rezoning of a property on Enfield Road. The developer wanted to increase the density allowed on the property, which would allow for more housing units.
Okay, so more housing sounds good in theory,
Yeah.
right? Especially the affordability crisis we've been talking about. But I'm guessing not everyone was thrilled about that idea.
You guessed right. The minutes highlight concerns from residents about increased traffic congestion strain on parking and potential changes to the character of their neighborhood.
Which are valid concerns, right? I mean,
Yeah.
people choose to live in a certain area for a reason, and change can be unsettling, even if it's ultimately for the greater good.
Exactly. And that's why these public hearings are so important. They give residents a platform to voice their concerns directly to their elected officials. It can get heated, sure, but it's democracy in action.
It's like those public hearings are where those high-level plans and policies we see in the meeting minutes collide with the lived experiences of everyday Austinites.
Exactly. And while the minutes can't capture every fiery speech or impassioned plea, they do provide a fascinating glimpse into these competing perspectives.
And those competing perspectives are really at the heart of so many challenges facing cities today, wouldn't you say? Growth versus preservation, affordability versus exclusivity,
Mhm.
the desire for progress while honoring the past. It's a delicate balance.
You hit the nail on the head, and while reading through pages of council meeting minutes might not sound like the most thrilling way to spend an afternoon,
You're telling me?
they actually offer us a unique opportunity to witness these complex dynamics playing out in real time. It's like getting a backstage pass to how decisions are made, how different voices shape those decisions, and ultimately how a city evolves.
It's like those old choose-your-own-adventure books, but instead of a spooky old house, it's the future of Austin we're navigating.
Exactly. And these council meetings, with all their complexities and contradictions, are how we write that story chapter by chapter.
And speaking of chapters, we've been diving deep into these council meeting minutes, uncovering the big plans, the small details, and the passionate voices shaping Austin's trajectory. But for those of us who aren't policy wonks or City Hall regulars, what's the key takeaway? What's the so what of all this?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I think the biggest takeaway here is that these meetings aren't just for politicians and developers, they're for all of us. They offer a window into how our city operates, how decisions are made, and how we can make our voices heard.
It's easy to feel disconnected from that process, like our individual voices are too small to make a difference in a city as big and booming as Austin. But these meetings remind us that even the grandest plans start with a single conversation, a single concern raised by a resident just like you or me.
Precisely. These meetings are a potent reminder that civic engagement isn't just about voting every few years. It's about staying informed, speaking up about the issues we care about, and holding our elected officials accountable.
So for those of us feeling inspired to get more involved, what's our next step? Do we need to clear our schedules for every single council meeting?
Well, becoming a city council meeting aficionado is certainly one option. But even small steps can make a big difference. Start by checking out the city's website, where you can find meeting agendas, minutes, and even watch recordings of past meetings.
So we can spare ourselves the marathon sessions and get straight to the good stuff.
Exactly. You can pinpoint the topics that resonate most with you, whether it's affordable housing, transportation, or even the next Wild West Purim celebration.
Because, hey, those quirky events don't just plan themselves.
And once you've identified your areas of interest, reach out to your council member directly. Send an email, make a phone call, attend a town hall meeting. Those connections matter.
So it's about turning that knowledge we've gleaned from these minutes into action, into making our voices heard.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, these meetings are just one piece of a much larger puzzle, the ongoing, ever-evolving story of Austin. And each and every one of us has a role to play in writing that story.
That's a powerful thought to end on. So to our listeners out there, the ones who are already deeply engaged in their communities, and those who are just starting to dip their toes into the waters of civic life, remember, your voice matters, your perspective is valuable, and the future of Austin is being shaped, in part, by the choices we make and the actions we take. That's it for this deep dive into the fascinating, sometimes baffling, always evolving world of Austin City Council meetings. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into a topic that matters to you. Until then, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep asking those big questions.